U.S. history. Did you miss me? I sure missed you. Yesterday, we talked about um, America's entry into the war, right? We were late to the party. At first, we had a neutrality policy. Then we started picking up our involvement with the Lend Lease program, right? We were given a ton of supplies to the Allies. And then finally, Germany wouldn't stop the shenanigans in the Atlantic and the Pacific. So the U.S., after Japan's bombing of Pearl Harbor, decided, between Germany's behavior on the seas and then obviously being attacked on our own soil. I guess really that's what it came down to, is being attacked on our own soil, and that makes sense. To win wars in Asia and Europe and meet civilian demands, the US government grew to its largest size ever. Remember, it had already increased in size in a big way during the New Deal. But now it's going to get even more power, even more size. The War Powers Act gives the president power to expand the government and limit liberties. We've seen this in periods of war before, where they take away certain freedoms in the name of victory. And one of the ways this took place is in the form of censorship, right? Propaganda was really big, and limiting enemy propaganda, or the people's access to anti-American propaganda, or even stuff that was critical of the government. That was important. Uh, the government imposed rations, sold war bonds, and drafted soldiers. And actually, I'm going to pause it there, and I'm going to look in my document drawer, because I think I've got something really cool to show you guys. Well, I'll figure out how to do that tomorrow, because I'm holding something in my hand right now that I think is really cool. It's actually my grandmother's ration book, war ration book number 3, and it has her name, her address, her age. She was 19 at the time. Her weight, 96 pounds. Height, 5'5". Occupation, stenographer. Signature, Hazel W. Cotton. So this was when she was a single lady, before she married my grandfather. But I'll have I'll have to figure out how to show my webcam on here so I can show you guys this, because I think it's really cool. But in the meantime, we're just going to keep going. In addition to getting the War Powers Act, we get something called the War Production Board. If you guys recall, when we talked about World War One, we talked about how it was a total war, right? We called it a total war, meaning that the whole country was mobilized, and everybody's efforts were being put towards the war. That happens during World War II in a big way. And remember, this mass increase in factory activity and factory work and production even though it was war materials, that was ultimately what got us out of the Great Depression. So the War Production Board is going to direct factories to produce war supplies so we could outproduce the Axis powers. Government spent $250 million every single day for 4 years. That's twice as much as all previous government spending combined. So let's see, 1776 to 1941. What is that? 165 years, I think, give or take. And in this 4 year period, the government spent twice as much as it had in the entire history of the country. That's crazy. There it is, something like this. This is a draft registration, but it looks very much like this. So you're going to war, you need soldiers. We've talked a ton about propaganda, but this one right here, I want you. Uh oh, where'd you go? That's probably the most famous one. Either him or Rosie the Riveter, that poster I had next to my whiteboard, if you can remember back when we actually came to school. They really encouraged buying bonds. They called them victory bonds. That was a good way for the government to raise money. We actually had a department of our government that was sort of like a propaganda department. Called it the Office of War Information. Here you see kind of the barbaric Japanese guy with a bloody dagger, and then Hitler looking down over the U.S. with a gun. It's a two-fisted fight. Keep them fighting, right? This is encouraging people to take industrial jobs. Keep them fighting. This is a great. I'm not a comic book guy, but I know a lot of people are. You guys, I believe, are into anime, but this is a copy of Captain America from the time, which is pretty clearly pro American. Looks like he's hitting a German, a Nazi in the face with a shield. Sidekick, whoever that is over here, is kicking someone. It's like I said, the War Mobilization Board, the War Mobilization Board uh, was the organization, the department that actually oversaw the production of war equipment. Um, and this is a picture of them building bombers. I believe those are bombers. They are B-24s. That's Henry Ford's. That's a Ford factory. So Ford's, um, you guys know, they build cars. They're a car company. But in this case, they put all their resources towards bombers and other war equipment. Kind of like how they were suggesting with the COVID-19 virus. People were saying, well, why not make 3M, the company that makes post-it notes and surgical masks, why not make them, spend all their time doing that? I mean, these are These are things that the government can do if they feel like they have to. Here they are building a battleship. Where it used to take almost a year to build a ship, now they're using something called prefabrication. If you guys have ever put together like a model plane or something like that, prefabrication, it's the same concept as removable parts, which were such a big deal with the typewriter and the cotton gin and the printing press. It's the same concept. Instead of having to build it basically from scratch, they can assemble these various parts. So, what did it do to consumers? Well, businesses and farm profits doubled. Remember, during the Depression, farms were really struggling. People couldn't afford to buy their goods at market value. So they had to, sit on, they couldn't afford to sell their stuff basically. Wages rose. And with people having more money, they wanted to buy stuff. But the thing is, most of our factories were being used to make tools of war. So there was a shortage of consumer goods, basically stuff you can buy. The Office of Price Administration, the government is getting massive, was the organization that fixed prices and distributed ration books to save gas, meat, butter. Ration books. I will not rest until I show that to you guys on camera. When she passed away, I went to my grandmother's house and I found it in an old book. So I'll have to show us that. Those are ration stamps. Had to ration your fuel consumption. We'll have lots to eat this winter, won't we, Mother? Grow your own can garden. Here we have a very elegant mannequin. Ladies window shopping. These look like female soldiers here. All right, American home front. When the U.S. declared war, the military needed soldiers to fight a two front war in Europe and Asia. Does that sound familiar? We said that same thing in World War One, except it wasn't Japan. 6 million men volunteered, 10 million more were drafted. Everything soldiers were given was government issue. And that's why we call World War II soldiers GIs. Guys, can you imagine? They're about to parachute into Nazi territory. This guy looks like he's y'all's age. This is one of the most iconic photos in American history. It's Marine raising the flag at Iwo Jima. There's actually a really interesting story, and it's a sad story. I happen to be a big fan of Johnny Cash, and he has a song called The Ballad of Ira Hayes. This is Ira Hayes right here. Ira Hayes was actually featured in that photograph, and he was a Native American. Unfortunately, after he came back from the war, he got into bad shape with drinking, and the last years of his life uh, were very sad. But still, this is there. It is. I mean, that's as American as it gets, guys. That's pretty cool. But it just goes to show you that people of all backgrounds and ethnicities contributed. Movie stars and singers and stuff would take trips to play for the GIs. This is Marlene Dietrich, the great Marlene Dietrich. During World War II, African Americans fought in the military and at home. The war led to factory jobs and increased the great migration of blacks in the North and West Coast. Remember, we saw that same thing in World War One. African Americans faced racial discrimination. Civil rights leader A. Philip Randolph forced FDR to offer equal pay for black workers by creating the Fair Employment Practices Commission. During World War II, African Americans fought in the military and at home. More than 1 million black soldiers served in segregated units under the command of white officers. Unlike World War I, black soldiers were allowed to fight. The Tuskegee Airmen in the U.S. military were recognized for heroism and bravery. If you guys ever have a chance to go to the Tuskegee Museum, I encourage you to do that. And we might talk more about those guys tomorrow. You can see the second Great Migration, a lot of people are going west. A. Philip Randolph, unless you really are interested in civil rights, the history of civil rights, he's not a name that we hear as often as some of the other um, civil rights leaders. And I think that's because A, his career, this was taking place several decades before the actual civil rights movement that we think of now took place. And also, when we studied that era, we're typically talking about World War II, not not civil rights. Beyond increased involvement in the military, helping in factories, etc. My point is, Randolph was highly influential, even though his name does not carry the same weight as a Dr. King. Look at him. There are leaders talking to him saying, we're going to get better. This looks like a football helmet. I'm not sure what a leather helmet would do to a bullet, but and these are the iconic Tuskegee Airmen and their pilot jackets. Really, really cool stuff. There are some interviews of former Tuskegee Airmen out there on YouTube. You should check out. Women also helped out in a big way. 6 million women entered the workforce. A lot of them did clerical work, so like secretary jobs, basically. It's what my grandmother did, stenographer. Others did what we usually think of as men's work, factories, that type of thing. Factories, farming. 200,000 women joined special non combat military units, which this makes sense, but with women increasingly working, now we start to see daycare centers popping up and child delinquency, or basically children running amok, misbehaving. Those things increase as well. But when the men came back from war, the women, most of them lost their jobs. There she is, Rosie the Riveter. Takes me back to old Mr. Pope's class. They now say Rosie the Riveter was based off of this lady. We see the WAC, the Women's Air Corps, excuse me, the Women's Army Corps. Woman's place in war. The Army of the United States has 239 kinds of job for women. Women's Army Corps. Share the deeds of victory. Have you got what it takes to fill an important job like this? Oh my. Be a cadet nurse, the girl with a future. Japanese Americans, and we're going to close out this lesson with a clip about Japanese internment. But let's go ahead and look at these slides first. Due to Pearl Harbor, people feared that Japanese Americans were spying or helping prepare for another Japanese invasion of the U.S. Roosevelt, who I've spoken very highly of, and I think he was a great president, he does something that really puts a stain, a significant stain on his resume. He issued Executive Order 9066. And that took over 100,000 Japanese Americans, right? Americans, to internment camps. Kind of like a prison camp. Here you see the path that the Japanese took. There's a picture of an internment camp. All right. So we've got some time left. Perfect.
Their shops and their farms. So the military and civilian agencies alike determined to do the job as a democracy should, with real consideration for the people involved. There were more Japanese in Los Angeles than in any other area. In nearby San Pedro, houses and hotels, occupied almost exclusively by Japanese, were within a stone's throw of a naval air base, shipyards, oil wells. Japanese fishermen had every opportunity to watch the movement of our ships. Japanese farmers were living close to vital aircraft plants. So, as a first step, all Japanese were required to move from critical areas such as these. Notices were posted. All persons of Japanese descent were required to register. They gathered in their own churches and schools, and the Japanese themselves cheerfully handled the enormous paperwork involved in the migration. Now the actual migration got underway. The Army provided fleets of vans to transport.
We'll pause it there because we're coming up on that 30 minutes. But did you catch the part where they said the Japanese cheerfully handled the paperwork? I don't know that I would have been cheerful, but anyway, we'll talk tomorrow. We'll get back on the great stuff we did. But it's important to be aware of these less pretty moments in American history too.